Hello friends, and welcome back to Shelley Skylines BrizVegas. In today's episode, we're building out the suburbs of West End and South Brisbane. But first, I wanted to show you some improvements I've been working on behind the scenes, so it's time for a quick city update. So firstly, Petrie Terrace and Spring Hill, these were the first two suburbs I really focused on building out when we started this series. As a result, it was done quite a while ago before the existence of any official mods. So I ended up actually completely demolishing them and building them again from scratch. And my obsession with the realism got taken up a notch as I decided to go block by block on Google Earth and recreate things as much as possible in terms of the types of buildings on each block, and even the shapes and sizes of the lots. Wowzers, it took some doing, but I'm so happy with how this is looking now, and the Sims agree. We've also got some additional landmarks in here now with the new and improved Caxton Hotel. And I was also able to put in the historical windmill tower in Spring Hill using the emergency services warning system building. And never fear, we also rebuilt the first Brisbane burial ground, made a lot more spooky thanks to all of the stained decals. We added a few more realistic scenes around the place, like this railway yard construction and some grimy back alleyways in the valley. And also a good chance to start adding in some more of these new school buildings in the recent detailers patch. Also revamped some of the highway off-ramps and added in a lot more of the realistic road networks, such as this monstrosity here known as the Normanby Fiveways. And finally, some upgrades to our Roma Street parklands, looking quite fantastic with the addition of our spurting water fountain. However, all of this destruction has caused quite a bit of a homeless issue as the Sims struggle to coordinate themselves with the changes. Whoops, sorry sir. So what better time to create a new suburb over here on the other side of the river in West End and South Brisbane? We had a bit of a thing going on here, but it is in desperate need of revamping. Quite a historical area, of course, both in the game and real life as well. Recently undergoing a bit of gentrification as a lot of these inner city suburbs do. But it's got a great mix of residential, commercial, and even a bit of industrial, so hopefully this helps a bit with our homeless crisis. So let's get into it. So here's something I prepared earlier, and a few updates after I just did this. For some reason, the game kept crashing whenever I tried to delete a few things in a row. I literally had to delete a few buildings, save the game, and repeat. But even when doing this so carefully, I still had plenty of crashes. Why? I also lost about 100,000 citizens in the process of this, plus the other redos. At one point, I spotted losing over 17k an hour. But maybe this is a good thing, because my game kept grinding to a halt recently, probably because of the huge population. But what gives Cities Skylines 2 really making me work hard at the moment? And actually, the stalling was getting a bit too much for me, so I did some research and I've ended up installing this mod called Bye Bye Homeless. I'm really sorry Sims, but all the people just standing around in all the random places, I think this was also causing the game to struggle. Not sure, but it does seem to have settled a little bit after doing this. So moving right along, I took the liberty to redo the road network because today we're going to focus on some of the new approaches and learnings that I've taken from the demolition of Spring Hill and Petrie Terrace. So what I want to focus on is building these blocks out one by one and detailing as we go. I think this process has shown me that it's just the only correct way to do this if we want something we can be happy with, in terms of it looking realistic and less samey. So let's start over here in South Brisbane. It's hard to imagine these days, but this part of town was originally covered with impenetrable rainforest, and it was known for being quite swampy as well. It was described as a tangled mass of trees, vines, towering scrub palms, giant ferns, beautiful and rare orchids, and the wild passion flower. Soon after the colonial folks and convicts arrived and deemed this a free settlement, they opened up some of the first blocks of land in South Brisbane for sale in 1842 in Sydney. Clearly, there were no inspections made prior, because many of the folks who were gypped into buying some of this land were complaining about the swamp situation and the fact that the various creeks around the area would overflow daily. And speaking of the water, it's worth noting that this general area of South Brisbane and West End has an indigenous name of Kurilpa, meaning place of the water rats. And this name Kurilpa is still used for various local places and buildings which still exist in the area today. Soon after though, the land had been overhauled somewhat to make it more suitable for agricultural use. There were a lot of farms popping up around this time, growing all kinds of fruits amongst other things. And by 1849, approximately 40 houses existed in South Brisbane, mainly located along the principal streets of Stanley, Russell and Grey Streets. The development continued with a number of wharves and commercial businesses in the area, seeing South Brisbane evolve into a bit of an industrial area with lots of factories and warehouses. And so with this industrial hub emerging on the South Brisbane side, this led West End next door to emerge as the ideal location for the workers to reside, seeing a lot of the previous agricultural land subdivided into lots for new homes, along with a number of schools being opened like the West End State School, the same building still existing in the area today, and Brisbane State High School up towards where South Bank sits today. The first set of shops started popping up along Boundary Street in the 1880s, as well as, of course, a few pubs, which is mandatory in Australia, and a number of these still operating today along this busy and bustling street. This also meant it was a prime location for one of the first ever tram stops in the city, as Brisbane started to roll out its first tram networks. And there's also two main train stations in the area at South Brisbane and South Bank. And speaking of Boundary Street, we touched on this in the Spring Hill video, and the Boundary Street in West End is also connected to the Boundary Street in Spring Hill, used by the colonial folks to form a boundary around the city to keep Indigenous people out of the area at certain times. The street name remains as a permanent reminder of the horrific treatment our ancestors inflicted on the traditional owners of these areas. West End evolved a lot over the years. When I was growing up, it was kind of known as that funky hippie part of town, with a really vibrant local culture and very multicultural. Some of the best Indian food I've ever had was certainly in one of these little local shops here. The recent gentrification, motivated by its close proximity to the CBD, has seen a bit of a split with two West Ends emerging, seeing a bit of a local campaign popping up to keep West End weird. Hopefully West End holds on to this same vibe going on as long as possible, though I guess you can't stop progress. But back to the street names, besides Boundary Street, some of the other main streets running through here are Vulture Street. You may have heard of Vulture Street before. As well as Cordelia Street. These run right through the middle of the suburbs and connect them to the other parts of southern Brisbane towards Woolloongabba. And this brings us back now to Montague Road, a place where a lot of the industry we mentioned were located. So I think given all of this history, it makes sense to start down this end of town. When I was doing my research, I found that there's 10 heritage listed buildings that still stand just on this street alone. And the first one along here was the home of an ice cream and milk factory run by Paul's, a company that started in Queensland and still operates today. This factory can be traced back to 1937 when it was open to compete with another big Australian ice cream conglomerate called Peters. Peters and Paul's, very creative names, guys. But also you may wonder, why does one little city need multiple ice cream factories? Well, fun fact, did you know that Australians consume more ice cream per person every year than any other country in the world? Anyway, I believe it was Paul's all the way up until 1998 when they were acquired by Italian company Parmalat, who in 2003 changed the name to Parmalat, and then it was rebranded as Lactalis, although they still use the Paul's brand name. It's actually only one of two remaining inner city factories that still have a running production line, the other one being the Castlemaine Beer Factory on the other side of the river in Milton. So I think this will be a good opportunity to use some of the specialised industry. And actually, we have the dairy house. This will be perfect. And then I might just add a couple of smaller buildings alongside to fill out the block. And the good thing about using Google Earth is I notice all of these little things around the place. So there's a specific motorbike parking garage here apparently, and there is actually one of these that came out with the detailers patch. So we'll add that in as well, and then we'll redo all the surfaces and a few little industrial touches. Looking good, and I'm also trialing this whole dual screen filming so you can see me working with Google Earth in real time. Let me know if you like this. But now across the road we have the administration building for Paul's, which was built in 1944. I might just use a regular office building for this and then surround it with these car parks. And the stain decals really help to rough it up, because I guess these are some pretty old and well-used car parks around the place. This is also a good chance to use the new recolor mod by Yen Yang. Even if I can't get the buildings exactly, it's nice to at least use a similar color palette. Loving this mod. Now I know that we can create custom car parks, but I do like to just reuse the existing ones when it's not some funkadelic arrangement. I think they look just fine. The other thing I'm loving about using Google Earth for this is you can pick up on some of these finer details like the grass peeking through under this railway line. So adding this in also helps to create little bits of interest around the place. Now before we move too far down the road, I found there's actually a fire hydrant here that's heritage listed, dating all the way back to 1913, so we absolutely have to add that in here. Now let's move up the street a bit to our next factory known as Stewart's and Lloyd's Premises. Designed by notable architects Hall and Phillips, the heritage listing notes that it is an unusually attractive group of buildings associated with heavy industry. I guess it looks alright, but anyway, I won't be able to add something so long and skinny in here, so I think I might just use the opportunity to add in another specialized industry. We won't have many other places in BrizVegas to put these, and they're needed in the city. I think I'll use the switch on electronics manufacturing. Also a good chance to throw in some industrial storage and some shipping containers and other industrial thingy doobies. We may as well add in one more specialized industry here with the paper factory, and we can finish off this little block here. Why is that so enjoyable? Alright, loving the way this industrial stuff is shaping up. We haven't really done much of this in BrizVegas yet at all. In saying that, let's shift gears a little bit to some fine shrubbery. We have a few lovely and of course very old parks in this place. So let's move up here a bit to Musgrave Park. This is one of the largest and oldest parks in Brisbane and was originally gazetted in 1856. With lots of open space, it became home to different sports like tennis and croquet. And Musgrave Park is notable not just because of its age, but as a place of cultural significance to the Indigenous people of the area. Originally the location of a camping ground that stretched across this whole area through to the south. It was a prime location for chopping wood, carrying water, and selling fish. It has since been the focus of several significant protests, land claims, and tent cities or tent embassies in modern times. It continues to be used today as a key location for events such as NAIDOC Week, Reconciliation Week events, and also things like the annual Greek festival Penieri and Pride Fair Day. So looking at this whole block here, we also have Brisbane State High School at the top along Vulture Street. So I think it makes sense now to add this in. We're going to use some of the new and improved school buildings from the detailers patch. And I think if you look at the building, it does look pretty similar to the urban high school. And just below it, we have some tennis courts and a big sports field, so we may as well use the soccer field for this. I wish I could change the colour of some of these courts. Maybe there'll be a mod for that soon. And as we move down the park, there's also a big swimming centre here, so we can use the community pool for this. Now this is something that does annoy me just a tad. Not being able to put park things down unless they're connected to a road. I have done some testing using invisible road paths and stuff to see if I can get around it, but no joy. So in these situations, I'll often use the good old pedestrian path as it's the only good option that we have. Something I found that does work though is when you move things too far from the road. I've had some success using the invisible pedestrian path to connect it. It doesn't seem to always work, but it did in this case. And then I might just start adding in the general shape of the park going so we can take a look at adding in all the fine shrubbery. So I decided to add in an elementary school up next to the high school to fill out this block. I just love that we have more flexibility over where to put some of these sub-buildings now. It helps to fill out the space very well. So it's time for some dang nature. And as usual, I'm going to start with the oak trees. They just fill stuff in so nicely. Now, something about this very old park is it has some very big old trees, of course. Sometimes the oaks just don't cut it, and you can now put objects on top of objects. So I've been using this as a bit of a way to create some really big trees when it makes sense to do so. It can look a bit funky at first, but I just mess around with it, change the height a bit, look at them from all angles. I think with the oaks at least, it doesn't look too bad, and it helps when I want to plop in some big ass trees. Alright, and the sun has come out. Nice. The autumnal glow of these trees isn't too realistic in hot and sunny Brisbane, but looks very nice. Let's get a bit of life into the place now, making it a hang-around area with some pedestrian paths, and then check out the scenery. Well, how lovely, and the Sims are already enjoying the recreation. So now that we've done some schools, we may as well hop over to the other side and do West End State School while we're at it. This one is a bit more nestled into the suburbs. And if we take a look up close, we have tennis courts either side and a pool at the back. And then also this pedestrian lane running down the side. And actually these buildings up the back here are a bit like the high school we just used, with that pedestrian walkway connecting the buildings. We'll definitely have to try this. So I'm actually thinking that the college is more reminiscent of this front building. Let's use this. And then we can use Anarchy to get rid of all the stuff around it. Now, when it comes to removing the inbuilt parking and pedestrian paths of these buildings, I've had a bit of an iffy experience with it. I probably still don't fully understand all the options in Anarchy mode, so I just mess around with these buttons until it eventually does what I want it to do. Very helpful, I know. But we definitely want to get rid of these car parks around the building, so I'm glad that this worked. Well, it kind of worked. So I put these tennis courts down, and suddenly the building is going off with pedestrian access pop-ups. This will be a common theme of this school build. For some reason though, I found that once I moved the building ever so slightly, they would just disappear, so that's good. But then if I did anything nearby, it might trigger it to go off again. That's bad. But I just move it a touch and it fixes itself. So anyway, this little area was some real trial and error, so I might just speed this along a little bit. So we ended up with our main layout of the schools here. It's another hodgepodge of different education buildings. A bit of a precinct if you like, including adding in this geological research building. Not only is it useful, but man, I just love this building. So hopefully all of this means we're set up for demand for a while. It's also great being able to add an extension to the college, but put it over here. Gives a nice variation to the buildings going on. Speaking of which, I noticed that there was the West End police station on the corner of the school. So I used one of the new urban police stations. I've got to say, this is a fine building as well. And then just a sprinkling of fine shrubbery, and I quite like using the Sully riverbed surfaces for some intentional garden areas, rather than just random trees. It makes it look super tidy. So we did that at the front of the school, but also around the school oval. And another thing I've been doing lately is making use of these barn buildings. I assume these are more like sheds up the back of this grass area, but these work so well because we can place them without any road connection. Super cute. So yeah, this is our little West End State School precinct complete. And for some reason, someone is either dying or sunbaking on the tennis courts. But let's move on. We've got our industrial, parks, schools, so I think it's time for some shops. So there's an interesting mix of shops around here with some of these heritage listed ones we saw earlier. And then we have your typical kind of grocery shopping centre places like this one here. So today this is where Coles is, one of the two big main grocery stores here in Australia. But actually, when I was looking at some old photos of this place, I found that prior to Coles, there used to be a Jack the Slasher here. Not sure if anyone remembers this. I don't really, because these shops had all been sold off to Woolworths by the time I was alive. But the actual Jack the Slasher who founded these shops used to live around the corner from us when I was growing up. It was this big, beautiful mansion looking place. At least when I was a little kid, it looked like a mansion, and there certainly weren't many places that looked like this where I grew up. But whenever we would drive past, my folks would always say, that's where Jack the Slasher lived. I always thought he was some kind of knife-wielding scary person. But turns out he was just slashing prices on groceries. And if you're still here listening to me tell you all of these silly stories, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me. So while we're moving up the street, we may as well add in some of these pubs too. We have the Boundary Hotel right here on, of course, Boundary Street. And I can't help myself but use the Villa signature building. It's just such an Aussie pub beer garden vibes. So I will use this until I eventually get something better. And now we get into some of these really old and heritage shops. And oh my God. So this is where I realized that I got a bit carried away expanding the school area without realizing that I took this all the way up to Boundary Street, which is just not right. This intersection here of Boundary Street and Vulture Street is full of little shops, and it just doesn't make sense what I've done here. But, might have to make some executive town planner decisions and live with this for now. Although I think this is really going to bug me, we must carry on. So along Boundary Street, it really sucks that we don't have that many cool shops and stuff to use in the game. So I think we're just going to use some random commercial and at least try to mimic the size of the lots as much as we can. Something I'm also thinking now is we can put down things like hotels and motels specifically. So it would be nice if we could intentionally choose restaurants or fast food places or something for this stuff. So I switched to Google Street View to start doing some detailing along here. And now we're in the real funky center of West End. So it's time to get creative. So I think I want to start down on this corner here of Boundary Street and Russell Street. There's a few specific things that we must add in here. There's this little seating area right on the corner with this big old tree and the snake winding along the back of the benches here. I don't think we can add that, but we also have this notice board here along the footpath and a whole lot of street art around the place. All very iconic West End vibes, honestly. And I think we can at least achieve some of this. So let's start adding in some garden beds for this grand old tree. And it's all about the little details here, adding in things like this little pole on the corner. And we have a few garden benches underneath the tree facing the building. Unfortunately for these benches out the front side, we'll just have to go with something basic, but I can live with that. Something I'm most excited about though is putting in this notice board. I used to always stop and read it as I was wandering down Boundary Street. Always a good vibe check on what's happening in the community. I can use some of these paste ups that I got from Paradox Mods to make it look a bit more like a regular notice board. So all of these are from a collection by Trist1322, and we'll be using these a fair bit in this space. They are absolutely amazing street art to get the vibes going on here. We've also got this little street sign directing to all the different parks and main streets around the place, so we can use this park signpost. So cute! We'll get rid of some of these elements from the next door building to add in some trees and benches out the front. And I don't think I've mentioned this yet either, but I also got these tree grate decals from Paradox Mods by Crypto Gamer Skylines. I think a lot of us were using sandboxes before, so this is a huge improvement for detailers. So let's pave the area now, and we can use some more of this street art to add this funky circular art on the ground next to the notice board. This is fantastic. Now looking next door, I noticed this very funky cafe, which seems to be an old house opened up. It has these funky pink garden beds out the front and even a pink bike rack. So just give me a moment and let's see what I come up for this. Alright, now this is a West End house if I ever did see one. I might just carry on back up Boundary Street, adding in some more street art, and how perfect is this? So Trist1322 has kindly created some other large murals. These are actually based on real art from Melbourne, Australia. So given what we know about Boundary Street today, this will be perfect to put here right on this corner. And this as well. And finally on the decal update front, I also got these rust and wall decaying decals from Tygon. Adds the perfect bit of grit to this old building. Now let's continue with some more shops to keep filling out the place. It's really coming along. So now I've just spotted on the map across the road here, another core memory unlocked. I forgot all about the Stefan Sky Needle. It's definitely not as big as I remember as a kid, but this is a remnant from Expo 88. Apparently this was earmarked to be sold to Tokyo Disneyland after Expo finished. But Stefan ended up buying it and plonking it here where his head offices were in South Brisbane. Stefan was a bit of a Queensland celebrity, a hairstylist who also had a chain of hair salons in the 90s. Do these still exist? I don't think so. Anyway, what I'm thinking is, now this is totally not realistic, but where else are we going to put the dang Sky Tower in BrizVegas? Even if this takes up the entire block, I think we're going to have to put this right here. Might have to go into the asset editor later and see if I can create a custom one with rainbow lights and a rainbow at the top. Excellent, love it. Now let's take a quick look at some of the old houses around the place. The Brisbane City Council Heritage Register site is where I get all of this information, by the way. So we have a few along Edmonstone Street, so let's head over there. First, right up on the corner, we have these block of flats known as Ventnor Flats. These have been here since 1922, and they're some of the first purpose-built flats in all of Brisbane. They look a lot like terrace houses actually, so I think a row of these will do nicely, and we'll try to match the colours. These flats are absolutely stunning. I wish we could do them more justice. The houses next door don't seem to be notable, but we'll fill them out so we can get to the next house along here known as the Quinta. This was built all the way back in 1886, and the heritage listing notes that it was the large house of a well-to-do citizen in a desirable location. Well, I say, better put this in then. And wow, cool, this is actually a really nice looking house. And after we change the colours, this is pretty close looking. Very good. Next door, we have this awesome looking place known as Sapien, a reflection of the Greek influence in South Brisbane and the West End area. This house was built in 1937, and I think we'll struggle to do this one justice as well. But let's see how we go, and what I might do is actually fill out this whole block as accurately as I can based on Google Earth so that you can see how I do this. So cute. Now you can see this does take a little while to do using this type of an approach, so I won't make you sit through every single block. Let's just start smashing out some more of this because we have a lot left to do. One block down, a million to go. To the time lapse. Now that's what I call a revamp. Loving the funky vibes, and I think we really captured that mix of old and new, industrial and sprawling residential, some gentrification but also keeping some of those grungy hippie vibes mixed in as well. And our population is back up to about 240,000. How exciting. I hope you enjoyed this build as much as I did. Let me know down below, what do you think? Is there anything you would change? Or what's your favorite part? I'd love to know. But for now, I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, thanks, bye.